Harvey Smith, who was or is the studio director of Arcane's spinoff studio in Austin, which is working on this game, said, quote, "We were acquired by Microsoft and it was changed with capital C. They came in and said, no PlayStation 5. We're focusing on Xbox, PC, and Game Pass," end quote. And this was a surprise because obviously they were building the versions concurrently. And of course, Smith, probably realizing what he just said in the interview, says, quote, "It's not very serious. It's even a good decision, I think. It helps to support Game Pass and have one less platform to worry about, one less complexity. Game Pass has a ton of players. It could become our biggest game thanks to 30 million, where I can't remember the exact number of subscribers," end quote. So I think he realized quickly that was going to be picked up by people that were curious about this. This is obviously a no-brainer. Of course, Redfall was in development for PS5. So was Starfield. I don't think anyone should be surprised by that. But a lot of these times, the builds are not even really materializing at this point. They're usually being built off of one PC build and they start splitting it off later. So I wouldn't read into this too much, but it really did remind people in some way, I think, of, and I think reasonably so, of just the double speak coming out of Microsoft. And I'm curious if you have anything you want to say about that. Dustin.
I understand that it probably wasn't really, when they say in development, it probably was, maybe they had some version running of it on PS5, and maybe even less than that. Maybe it was just kind of planned as they were building out the game on kind of a generalized PC hardware, and then we're going to port later. Could be a bunch of different things. I think ultimately this makes complete sense. At the same time, I think someone in our Discord said this, and it made a lot of sense to me. It's like they probably had a PS5 version of Starfield too. Like there's probably a bunch of PS5 games, and it's like, yeah, they went and bought them. And Phil Spencer specifically, now, and I think this is where some of this doublespeak comes in that you talk about or mentioned, Colin, is that he very specifically in that one sit down interview type thing they were doing said that like buying Bethesda was about bringing great exclusive content. It's like, okay, that makes sense. That's why you paid for and bought the company. But now with the different Activision Blizzard stuff, there's a lot of giving players choices to play wherever. It's like, what you really mean by that is giving player choice as long as it's not on PlayStation. Or I guess in their theory, back to something we talked about a lot, is that having Game Pass on PlayStation would be the only way to have that choice. So I think it's kind of a lot of nothing, as you were saying, but at the same time, I get why people are bringing up this comparison as well.
Yeah, I'll say this is like we've already reiterated, it's a no-brainer. The game was, of course, coming to PS5. And I'm not surprised that Microsoft took it away. They bought the company, but they did say they were going to do something differently. And I do think it's important to underline, and I'll just say this unambiguously, as I've said many times, companies lie to you. People lie. They obfuscate. They tell you exactly what they want to tell you. These people are PR trained. These companies spend millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing and direction. Microsoft famously has an entire external PR firm that works on behalf of Xbox. Thank you. And so to me, I don't think too much of it is surprising. I think it's just interesting to hear kind of people's take on it. And I don't know, Chris, I don't know if you agree. I do think it exposes the hypocrisy of Microsoft's message behind the Activision deal, which is like, well, people should have access to games, play games everywhere. And I'm like, well, you clearly don't think that. And I'm not saying you're wrong to do what you're doing, but why are you saying this when you're clearly not doing that? Yeah. And so I think both sides are deeply exposed at this point. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts you want to add on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like to me, it does make sense. If you spend a ton of money on a publisher and a bunch of developers, like it makes sense that some of those titles would be exclusive, and it makes total sense to me that you might want to cancel certain SKUs of projects that wouldn't really behoove you to publish. I also do feel like, yeah, it is hypocritical and it is kind of annoying, but it's also standard corporate jargon. It's just like, this is not particularly, I don't know, I'm not surprised by any of this. I think anybody who has a clear or even like a vague understanding of how game development works or how long games take to gestate could reasonably guess that Redfall was planned for PS5 and could reasonably assume that Starfield was planned for PS5. And there's obviously a reason why that's not happening anymore. And I think everybody understands that. it's just gonna. I'm more curious about how this information will affect the case that's going on, if it will at all, because it is a pretty, it's a relatively high profile example of them kind of not doing what they said they were going to do. And I wonder if that's going to like sway in any meaningful way. Maybe not. But it's making the rounds.